Welcome back. Pregnancy and childbirth are very important life changes women experience very intimately. What kinds of support systems are out there to help women cope and get through pregnancy aside from the traditional doctors and midwives? Well, today we're about to interview Hira Khan, a CAPPA and DONA trained labor and birth doula. Let's talk to her about exactly what she does as a doula and how she supports women and their families through this process. Hira, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So I understand you're a doula, and we're talking about that today. So break it down for me. What is a doula?
Yeah, so the word doula is actually a Greek word, and it means female servant. So what it is really someone who's focused on taking care of the mom or the mother during pregnancy, during the delivery, and in the postpartum stages. And doulas are really there to just support offer women-centered care.
Mm-hmm. So are doulas medically trained, or how do you guys get certified and trained?
Yeah, so there is a certification process and certain number of observation hours, certain number of births that you have to have gone to before you can become certified. But we do not focus on anything that's considered clinical.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that doulas are really just there to provide care for the mother. So we're not responsible for the baby in any way. And so typically medical care staff is responsible for the baby and the vitals. So we don't do anything medically related.
So how are you guys different? So I think you've kind of answered my question, but just to clarify, so your role is different than that of a midwife, for example, and an OB, obviously?
Absolutely. So doulas complement midwives and OBs really well. And typically when I step in the room, the hospital care staff, or if you're having a home birth with your midwife, they're usually really happy to see doulas because we're an extra set of hands.
Mm-hmm.
So we're there to provide relief for mom in terms of, acupressure, massage, maybe get mom changing positions, maybe make sure she's hydrated and eating well throughout the birth. And so we're really there to work in unison with the staff and whoever you decide your care provider is.
And so just out of curiosity, how did you yourself get into the field of doulaing, if that's a word?
Doulaing, yeah. That's the million-dollar question. I mean, people always ask me, like, how did you end up doing this, or what inspired you? So I actually had a doula with my eldest son's birth, and that was several years ago.
How did you come across the idea of having a doula?
Actually, it was my husband who suggested it.
Very interesting.
I think he wanted a doula more than me for himself, so he could have breaks and he could nap, and that he knew what he was doing. Because our whole life, women, we're kind of expected what to know.
Mm-hmm.
We're told, taught to be maternal from a young age, whereas men, they don't really see that, especially in our community. It's a very sort of hush-hush topic. And
you're talking about specifically in the Muslim community?
Specifically in the Muslim community, and even outside of the Muslim community, actually. It's just what we know about birth is framed by Hollywood movies and like TV shows, sitcoms, where like you might be at Walmart and your water
your
crashes.
Water breaks, run to the hospital.
Yeah, you know, and that's how we think birth is, when it's in actuality it's not usually like that, it's a process.
And so your own experience, taking you back as a Muslim woman, what were some of the, I guess, challenges that you faced? Because you talked about, it's a gap in the Muslim community, and you're obviously probably one of the few who decided to go ahead with a doula. Yeah. What were some of the gaps that you experienced from the Muslim perspective?
Yeah, so for myself, I had a very amazing, very spiritual doula, which was great because she was very open-minded, and she would remind me to pray during labor. The only thing is that sometimes...
Sorry, just to clarify, was she a Muslim herself?
No, she was a non-Muslim.
Okay, but more spirituality was sort of an area of focus for her.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like she was just a very open-minded person, and usually doulas are very flexible in that way, and she was all of those things. So she was great. The only thing that I felt was lacking was, she would say, do you want to pray? Maybe you should pray. And, in labor, the words kind of escape you. And you're not always completely yourself. So I wish I had someone telling me what to say. And so one thing I really make sure of in my practice, and we talk about this prenatally, like me and the expecting couples, is, what du'as would you like to say? What kind of prayers, do you want to say specifically during birth? Or is there anything specifically that you'd like me to recite or read, for you from the Quran or from any...
And so you work with them right from the very beginning, or is it closer to the end when you talk to them about, is it more closer to the actual labor
Yeah, so people usually hire me. There's like a joke where as soon as you find out you're pregnant, you call your doula before you call your husband.
Okay.
So they usually like to make sure I'm available. So several clients will call me very early on, but typically we don't really start actively working together until the first trimester is over, which is, 20 plus weeks. And that's when we start meeting prenatally.
And that's where you talk
things.
about like the spirituality component.
Absolutely, if it's
stuff.
important to them. For some women, that's not important, and so we won't, we just focus on what's most important to her.
So I want to pick up a little bit on the spirituality. So you're obviously a Muslim doula. How do you incorporate spirituality in terms of, what we know from the Quran, for example, or from stories of prophets, of women mentioned in the Quran?
Yeah, so I mean, the most obvious one is Mary, mother of Jesus, or Isa alayhi salam. And I think there's a lot of pressure for Muslim women to somehow sort of channel their inner Mary and, do it the way she did. And people will use examples like, oh, well, she did it and she was all by herself. And I think it's really important to recognize some of the actual lessons rather than the expectations to be like her. So what are some of the lessons that we know? And this is universal to all religions. So we know that the birth took place in Bethlehem. And I've actually been to Bethlehem. I went there last year. And it's a very serene and a very calm place. There's this like energy there that's very different than any energy I've experienced anywhere else in the world. And people are very much in a unison there, regardless of your faith or what background you come from. So I think that's one important thing to remember, is that she was in a calm and a very isolated place. So if we look at how women give birth today, we're in very crowded hospitals or we're in crowded waiting rooms. So that's something to consider, is that maybe delay going to the hospital until you really need to go, because that privacy and that isolation is so important. And we know that from the story of Mary. Also, when she shakes the trunk of the date palm tree, that's really important as well. So we know that she's eating and nourishing herself during labor. The third most important point is the prayer. In despair, she speaks out to God and asks for his help. So that's another thing that we can do, regardless of, what specific background you belong to. You can just say a little prayer for yourself. And so those are just some examples that I think are kind of overlooked. And like I said, we focus too much on the expectation without looking at, the real examples that we have from that story.
Do you think the perception of doulas in the community is changing in terms of, the acceptance of doulas? So I'll be honest, when the first time I Googled it, I was like, I wonder what a doula is. So I didn't really know about it until, obviously talking to you and researching. So do you think that's changing within the community, or what's your take on that?
Yeah, so I think that, while doulas have been around for centuries, this is not a new phenomenon. Some people think it's like a new status quo to have a doula. I do think definitely doulas are on the radar a lot more now that there are professional organizations, like internationally as well, organizations that have a training certification process. But to be really honest, doulas have been around. There's always that very wise aunt or, person in the community that, maybe knows everything about birth, and she's helped several generations of children come into the world, right? We've all heard of that in other countries as well. So I would say that the certification process has really put doulas more on the map, along with social media. We can now have our own blogs. There's ways that doulas can share their work and ideas in ways that wasn't possible before. There's just other ways of sharing like the inside story as a doula more than there were before. So I think that's really helped us come a long way.
So Hira, what are the services that you offer as a doula?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Because like we were talking about earlier, not everyone is sure what a doula does. So I like to meet with the couple prenatally, and we go over some basic prenatal education, touch upon any questions that they may have specific to them or in general.
When you talk about prenatal questions, are you from the perspective of the mom, right? Not specifically related to the baby, or you do a bit of that as well?
Both.
Okay.
Right? So prenatally, as well as what to expect on the day of delivery, and then what to expect on the postpartum period. I think one of the most important services that doulas offer is a birth plan. And that's really coming up with an idea or a plan of what to do once baby's here, as well as what to do, you know, when I go into labor, who do I call, you know, should I wait at home or should I go to the hospital right away? That's really where a doula can guide you, and it can save you a lot of time, because sometimes if it's your first baby, you don't know what to expect, and you might find yourself at the hospital like every other day thinking you're in labor. So it's really good to have a resourceful person who's trained, right, and who can offer that sort of unbiased support and education as you need.
So do you, and just to clarify, do you meet with the midwife and the OB, whoever the couple is working with, or are you working specifically with the couple and you would meet them on the day of, if it so happens, kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So typically I don't meet with the OB or midwife beforehand. I work with the couple, and then when they do go into labor, that's when I'll usually meet the care provider. And something to keep in mind is that with the OBs, you kind of get whoever is on call. So sometimes the option isn't available
to get
to meet them beforehand. With midwives, the nice thing is that if my clients did want me to meet with their midwives, then that would be something I can do, and we're sort of guaranteed that either the primary or secondary midwife that I met with would be at the birth.
Definitely a very enlightening and informative conversation for me, and hope it'll be the same for our viewers. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey YouTube, we hope you benefited from this video. If you liked it, or if you didn't, let us know in the comments below. And if you're interested in learning more, check out some of our other videos. And don't forget to subscribe so you can get new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.